Lily Morgan wasn't loud. She didn't chase after crowds or beg for the newest toys. She was the kind of kid who noticed small things. The way a bird shivered in the cold, the way her dad's eyes softened when he talked about her mom, and especially the way dogs tilted their heads when you spoke to them gently. She was 8. With wild curls, she often forgot to brush and mismatched socks she claimed were lucky. Her dad, a mechanic with rough hands and a gentle soul, said she'd been born with a heart too big for her small frame. Ever since her mom passed, Lily had found comfort in animals. She said they didn't expect you to explain, they just knew. Most Saturdays, while other kids played soccer or slept in, Lily spent her time at the town's modest animal shelter. She wasn't officially old enough to be a volunteer, but no one had the heart to turn her away. She brushed fur, filled food bowls, and sang lullabies to scared puppies who trembled in crates. There was a special magic to her presence. Even the grumpiest old bulldog named Max, who had snapped at everyone else, would lay his head in Lily's lap and snore. "She's got some kind of whisper in her," the shelter manager often said, shaking her head in wonder. Lily didn't talk much at school. She wasn't unpopular, just quietly different. Kids noticed the faded animal stickers on her backpack and the way she carried a notebook full of dog sketches. Some teased her for it, but Lily didn't mind. She always said animals were easier to understand than people anyway. She didn't want much for herself. Not really. But she wanted everything for them, for the lost, the left behind, and the scared. That's why she had been quietly saving money. Quarters from tooth fairy visits. A few dollars for every A on her report card. A bit here, a bit there. Her goal wasn't a toy or a tablet. It was something else entirely. One evening, while feeding a shy beagle at the shelter, Lily overheard something that made her stop mid-scoop. 2 volunteers were talking about a dog auction. It wasn't like an adoption event. This was something different. People paying money, big money, for dogs. She didn't like the way it sounded. It felt cold, transactional, wrong. That night, she asked her dad about it. And when he explained what a dog auction was, Lily quietly said, "I want to go." She didn't know it yet, but that decision would start something that would reach far beyond one scared dog and one little girl. It would change everything. The following Saturday, Lily woke up early, excited and determined. She had set aside every penny she could find, loose change from her dad's pockets, a few dollars from selling homemade dog toys to neighbors, and even the extra quarters she earned from helping Mrs. Harris across the street with her grocery bags. By the time she had everything counted and packed into a small envelope, she had $28. It wasn't a lot, but it was hers, and it was all for the dogs. Her dad, a bit skeptical but supportive, agreed to take her to the auction. They climbed into his old truck, the engine grumbling to life, and drove the short distance to the town hall where the auction was being held. Lily sat quietly in the passenger seat, her fingers tightly gripping the envelope. As they approached the building, Lily's stomach fluttered. The place was buzzing with people, mostly adults. They were dressed in their best clothes, the men in worn suits and the women in modest dresses. There was a strange energy in the air, like something important was about to happen. But Lily wasn't sure what. When they walked through the door, the sound hit her first. The chatter. The clinking of coins and the rustling of paper. People were talking excitedly about the dogs that would soon be brought out for sale, discussing prices and potential bids like it was a marketplace. But Lily's heart sank as she looked around. The dogs weren't in cages or pens like at the shelter. They were lined up on the stage, standing in front of the auctioneer, trembling and confused. She could see their eyes, wide, fearful. These weren't dogs waiting to be loved. They were objects, property. And Lily didn't like it. Her father, who had never been one to get involved in things like this, stood beside her, looking uneasy. "You sure about this, kiddo?" he asked quietly. Lily nodded, her eyes focused on the first dog being presented. It was a golden retriever, beautiful but skinny, its ribs showing beneath a rough coat of fur. The dog was shaking, its eyes darting around, unsure of what was happening. The auctioneer called out the starting bid. It was high, too high for Lily's small amount of money. Still, she couldn't take her eyes off the dog. Something about it called to her. She couldn't explain it, but it was as if this dog needed someone to speak up for it. Without thinking, Lily dug into her pocket, pulled out her envelope, and raised her hand. Her heart pounded as she made her bid. $28, she said, her voice trembling slightly but loud enough for everyone to hear. The room fell silent. Lily's hand dropped back to her side as the auctioneer's eyes flicked down to her. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some snickered. "Sorry, little one," the auctioneer said, a forced smile on his face. "You'll need more than Matt to play in here." He moved on, and the crowd's attention returned to the stage. Lily's cheeks burned. She felt small, but she also felt something else, something she hadn't expected. A strange, quiet courage rose inside her. She hadn't won the dog, but she hadn't given up either. It was something that couldn't be measured in dollars. But then, the guard walked over, and that was when everything started to change. Lily stood frozen, her small hand still hovering in the air. The room had fallen quiet, and all eyes were now on her. She could hear the murmurs of disbelief, whispers about how sweet, yet naive she was. But Lily wasn't worried about what they thought. Her heart ached for the golden retriever, whose sad eyes met hers, as if silently pleading for help. And in that moment, Lily knew, more than ever, that she had done the right thing, no matter how small her bid had been. The auctioneer cleared his throat, his face taking on a forced politeness as he moved on to the next dog. Lily's hand slowly dropped to her side, her fingers curling tightly around the envelope of coins she had brought with her. But before she could even blink, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're gonna need a lot more than that, kid." Lily looked up to see a tall man with a thick mustache and a baseball cap who had been standing at the back of the room. He chuckled as he turned his attention back to the auctioneer. His comment wasn't directed at her, but the sting of it lingered. She glanced down at her envelope, suddenly feeling very small. She had been naive, hadn't she? She was just a kid. What could she possibly do? Her dad, who had been standing quietly beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Lily," he said softly, his voice laced with concern, "maybe we should go. This isn't the right place for you." Lily didn't want to leave. Not now. Nam and the dog was still out there, trembling, waiting for someone to see her. But before she could say anything, a security guard approached them. His expression was kind but firm. "I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to leave, young lady," the guard said, his voice deep but not unkind. "This isn't really a place for children, especially not during the bidding." Lily's heart dropped into her stomach. She had barely been allowed to stay long enough to make her bid, and now she was being told to leave. She wanted to argue, to explain that she had just tried to help, but the words caught in her throat. The security guard gently placed his hand on her back and guided her toward the door, her dad trailing behind. "I don't understand," Lily whispered as they walked outside. "I just wanted to help the dog. Why doesn't anyone else care?" Her dad didn't have an answer. He simply put his arm around her shoulders as they stepped into the cool evening air. "I'm no sweetheart," he said softly. "I know, but not everyone sees things the way you do." As they stood outside the auction hall, Lily wiped away a few stray tears. She wasn't angry, just disappointed. She had tried, with everything she had, and it hadn't been enough. Still, deep down, something told her this wasn't the end. It was only just the beginning. Lily stood on the steps of the auction hall, her heart heavy in her chest. The evening air was cool, but it didn't do much to calm her racing thoughts. She couldn't stop replaying the moment she raised her hand, her small voice cutting through the noise of the room. $28. It had felt so right in that moment, so important, but now it seemed so insignificant. She looked up at her father, his expression soft, yet full of concern. He hadn't said much when the guard approached them, but Lily could tell he wasn't happy. The disappointment in her father's eyes stung more than anything else. She had hoped he would be proud of her for standing up for the dog, but all he saw was a little girl who had tried and failed. "Dad, I don't get it," Lily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Why can't I just help? Why can't people see what I see?" Her father knelt down beside her, his large, calloused hands gently resting on her shoulders. He didn't have an answer. He knew how much Lily cared for animals, how deeply she felt things. He had seen it before in the way she cried when a stray dog was put down, or the way she refused to let an injured bird go until it was well again. Lily had a heart that saw beyond what others did. But sometimes the world wasn't so easy to change. "I'm enough, sweetheart," he said quietly, his voice heavy with sadness. "Sometimes people just don't understand. But what you did today, that's more than a lot of adults would have done. I'm proud of you for caring." Lily wiped her eyes and nodded, though the words didn't quite reach her heart. She knew he meant it, but it didn't make the sting go away. She had tried so hard. She hadn't won the bid, but that wasn't what hurt. What hurt was knowing she was powerless in a world that treated animals like commodities. She couldn't fix it on her own, no matter how hard she tried. As they turned to leave, her father paused and looked at the door, his brow furrowed in thought. "You know, Lily, something's not right about this auction. Maybe it's time we looked into it." Lily glanced up at him, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," he said, still lost in thought. "But if there's one thing I know about you, it's that you don't just give up. You keep fighting for what's right, even when it's hard." Lily smiled faintly, the words bringing a flicker of hope. She hadn't been able to help that dog today, but she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She had a feeling this wasn't the end of her journey, it was just the beginning. And maybe, just maybe, her final bid had sparked something bigger than she could have imagined. The next few days were a blur. Lily couldn't stop thinking about the auction, the way she had been thrown out, the way the golden retriever had looked at her, and the overwhelming feeling of helplessness that had crept in. But life didn't slow down for disappointment. She still went to school, still helped her dad in the garage, and still spent her Saturdays at the shelter. But something had shifted inside her. And then, one night, everything changed. It was a Friday and Lily was sitting in her room, drawing pictures of the dogs she had met at the shelter. Her father was in the kitchen, tinkering with something. They didn't have cable, but Lily liked to check the local news online. She opened her laptop and scrolled through her feed, barely noticing anything. That was until a headline caught her eye. "Little girl's bid at dog auction touches hearts across the country." Her heart skipped a beat. Curious, Lily clicked on the link. She watched the video, a clip of her standing in the auction room, hand raised, her soft voice calling out for the golden retriever. The video showed her being gently escorted out by the security guard, her father following behind. It was clear she hadn't won the dog. It was also clear that she hadn't been treated fairly. But what Lily hadn't expected was the overwhelming wave of support that followed. The video had gone viral, shared by people who saw the injustice in what had happened. The comments flooded in. "This girl has a heart bigger than most adults. Someone needs to adopt this child's heart. Why are we selling dogs like this? This little girl sees the truth." The support wasn't just local, it was global. People from all over the world were commenting, sharing, and even donating money to the shelter where Lily volunteered. Someone set up a crowdfunding campaign for animal rescue efforts in her name. The donations poured in, more than Lily could have ever imagined. It was like her small act of kindness had ignited a fire, and now everyone was paying attention. Lily couldn't quite process it all. She watched the video again, hearing her own voice in the clip, her bid for the dog still ringing in her ears. But it was the message that overwhelmed her. You are not alone. Her dad came into the room just as she was reading through the comments. He smiled, shaking his head in disbelief. Well, kiddo, he said softly, seems like the world heard you. Lily nodded, her heart swelling. She hadn't won the dog at the auction, but she had won something far more important. The attention of people who cared, people who understood that animals deserved love, not just a price tag. In that moment, Lily realized something incredible. She had started a movement simply by being true to herself. And that was just the beginning. The next week was a whirlwind. Lily's phone, a small hand-me-down from her dad, buzzed constantly with messages from strangers, news outlets, and even local rescue organizations. The shelter where she volunteered had become the center of attention. The donations were pouring in, and they didn't stop. People from every corner of the country were sending money, dog food, and supplies. They were writing messages of support for Lily, praising her for her courage and compassion. Her dad couldn't believe it. "Look at this, Lily," he said one evening, showing her an email from a national animal rescue organization. "They want to partner with us. They're going to sponsor some of the shelter's adoption events, help pay for medical care for the dogs, and even offer you a chance to work with them." Lily's eyes widened as she read the email herself. It was all so much, more than she could have ever imagined. The idea that her small, heartbroken bid for a dog had sparked a nationwide response felt surreal. As if that wasn't enough, local news stations wanted to interview her. They wanted to know what had inspired her to act. Soon, Lily found herself sitting in front of a camera, trying her best to answer questions. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, but the words came easily. She talked about her love for dogs, how much she wished to make a difference, and why animals shouldn't be treated like commodities. The interviews aired across the town and then spread beyond the local area. One evening, a popular talk show picked up the story and invited Lily to appear as a guest. It was all so overwhelming, yet exhilarating. People were listening to her. They were hearing her plea for compassion. She wasn't just a little girl in a small town anymore. She was a symbol of change. But the greatest surprise came when the town council called for a meeting. The local government, in response to the growing support for Lily's cause, decided to discuss possible regulations for dog auctions. They wanted to hear from Lily, her father, and the community. It was clear that her act of kindness had sparked something deeper, a movement that could change the way animals were treated in their town. Lily couldn't believe it. What had started as one small bid had turned into something far bigger than she ever could have imagined. And through it all, she remained humble, always returning to the shelter to help, never losing sight of what had motivated her in the first place. She hadn't won the dog at the auction, but now it felt like she had won something much more valuable: the chance to change the way people saw animals, to make sure they weren't just treated as property. She had ignited a fire, and now others were joining in. It was only the beginning. It had been a few weeks since Lily's bid at the auction, and life had been moving at a fast pace. The shelter was bustling with new donations, and there was a sense of optimism in the air that hadn't been there before. The town was beginning to talk about changes: regulations on dog auctions, new rules for animal treatment, and even talks of a new animal welfare initiative. It was incredible to see how much support Lily's small act had generated. But one thing still weighed heavily on her heart: the golden retriever, the dog she had tried to save that day at the auction. Lily hadn't forgotten about her, not for a second. She still thought about the dog every day, the way her sad eyes had looked at Lily in that moment, as if the golden retriever had known she had been the one to try and help. Despite all the support, all the attention, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that she had let that dog down. One afternoon, while helping out at the shelter, Lily's phone buzzed with a notification. She picked it up, expecting to see another news article or a message from someone wanting to donate. But this one was different. The message came from a woman named Sarah, and it was accompanied by a photo of the golden retriever. "Hi, Lily. I wanted to reach out and let you know that I adopted the dog from the auction, the one you tried to save. I saw the video of you that went viral, and I couldn't stop thinking about you and how much you cared for her. I named her Daisy, and she's doing so well. I wanted to send you a picture so you could see that she's happy and loved." Lily stared at the photo of Daisy, now healthy and vibrant, her fur shining in the sunlight. The dog's eyes were no longer filled with fear, but with contentment. Daisy had found her home, and Lily's heart swelled with joy. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as she ran her fingers across the screen of her phone. "I did it," she whispered. "I helped her." Her father, who had been nearby, came over and saw the photo. He smiled at her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't just help her, sweetheart. You helped a lot of dogs, and you helped a lot of people see what's important." Lily nodded, unable to find the words to express how she felt. She had started with a simple, heartfelt bid to save one dog. And now, Daisy was home, living the life she deserved. But that wasn't all. The ripple effect had already begun. More people were beginning to question the practices at dog auctions. The shelters were fuller than ever, and more families were adopting. There was hope now, a kind of hope that Lily had sparked. A hope that animals like Daisy wouldn't have to face fear and uncertainty. Daisy's photo was just the beginning of something bigger. It wasn't just one dog being saved, it was a movement, and Lily had played a huge part in it. Months passed, and the town slowly began to change. What had started with one small girl's bid at an auction had grown into something larger than anyone could have imagined. The regulations on dog auctions were passed, ensuring that animals were no longer treated as mere property to be bought and sold. Instead, there were strict guidelines for animal care, adoption procedures, and a stronger focus on rescue efforts. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and it was a start Lily could be proud of. Her small act had sparked a revolution. The shelter where Lily had volunteered was thriving now. Donations flooded in daily, and more animals were being adopted into loving homes. Thanks to Lily's viral video, other towns had started reaching out to her, asking for advice on how to start similar campaigns for animal rights. It felt surreal. Lily had become a voice for the voiceless, a symbol of kindness and persistence. Lily still visited the shelter every Saturday, always checking on the dogs, making sure they had everything they needed. She had even started a small program to teach kids about compassion for animals, showing them how to care for and understand animals just like she had. There was so much she wanted to do, and her heart swelled with excitement thinking about the future. But despite everything that had changed, there was still something special about Daisy. Lily hadn't seen her since that day she received the photo, but she hadn't forgotten about her. The golden retriever was still on her mind. After all, she had been the catalyst for it all. One warm afternoon, as Lily was walking out of the shelter, a familiar figure caught her eye. There, standing by the gate with a wagging tail, was Daisy. The golden retriever had come to visit. Lily's heart leaped in her chest as she rushed over to Daisy, who immediately jumped up to greet her, licking her face happily. "Daisy," Lily exclaimed, laughing as she hugged the dog. She couldn't believe it. Daisy was here and she was living her best life. The dog's fur was healthy, her eyes bright and full of joy. As Lily crouched down to pet her, she noticed the woman who had adopted Daisy standing nearby. Sarah smiled warmly. "I thought Daisy might like to see the place where everything started," she said softly. Lily nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you for giving her a home. She's happy, I can tell." Sarah smiled, holding out her hand. "We have you to thank for that. If it weren't for your video, I might never have found Daisy. You changed everything, Lily." The words hit Lily harder than she expected. She had changed everything. It wasn't just about rescuing one dog. It was about changing the way people thought, about teaching them compassion and respect for all living things. And she wasn't done. There was so much more to do, and now she knew that she could make a difference. She had proven that. As she stood up, Daisy nudging her affectionately, Lily realized something profound. This journey had started with a small act of kindness, a simple bid at an auction, but it had blossomed into something bigger, a movement that had the power to change the world. The future was bright, and Lily was just getting started.